Hello, and welcome to Leading Forward, our summer speaker series. My name is Kate Treitman Brown. I graduated from Nobles in 1999, and I'm back working as the Director of Graduate Affairs. We know that you have many choices for what to do this summer, especially virtually, so we appreciate you spending the next 45 minutes to an hour with us as we have an exciting program. It also will be recorded. A couple of folks have asked about that, so if you would like to share this with other Nobles community members, please feel free to do so. We will share out the link on social media tomorrow. I'm excited to introduce our speakers. Harry Elam and Paul Ayoub will be with us, both from the class of '74, and they will be discussing Harry's career arc, including his nearly 30 years at Stanford University, his commitment to social and racial justice, and his approach to his new role as the president of Occidental College. They will also focus on the challenges facing higher education and the opportunities in 2020, including issues around the impact of COVID-19. So we'll hear from them, and then we will have an opportunity for question and answer. However, if you have questions at any point during the presentation, feel free to pop them into the Q&A box, and they will get to those after their presentation. Special thanks to the tech team, Tessie Smith, as well as the Graduate Council, in particular, Paul Ayoub, one of our panelists tonight, for helping to put this together. It wouldn't have been possible without them. So I'm thrilled to welcome our panelists, and I'll ask them to start their video and join me on the screen stage. Great. So Paul Ayoub graduated from Nobles in 1974 and went on to Brown University and Boston College Law School. Prior to his career as an attorney, he worked as an assistant press secretary for the governor of Massachusetts. Paul is currently on the executive committee of the law firm of Nutter, McLennan, and Fish. He also serves as the chair of the firm's COVID-19 task force. He represents a broad range of businesses and commercial real estate clients locally and around the country. Paul just also completed his term as the board chair of the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce, on the board of directors, where he has served for over 20 years, and he is the past chair of the Real Estate Finance Association. In addition to his work in Boston, Paul is vice chair on the national board of directors of St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital and previously served as the chair of ALSAC, the fundraising and awareness organization for St. Jude. He has served as a trustee of Nobles as well as the president of the Graduates Association and is one of our distinguished graduates. A special thanks again to Paul, who as a member of the Graduate Council at Nobles helped to put this series together. I'm thrilled that he has also agreed to speak with Harry this evening. Dr. Harry J. Elam Jr. graduated from Nobles as well in 1974 after serving as SLC president and went on to get a BA from Harvard and a PhD in dramatic arts from Cal Berkeley. Harry took over as the president of Occidental College as of July 1st of this year. He came to Occidental from Stanford University, where he had been since 1990. Most recently, Harry served as the vice provost for the undergraduate program. Since 2017, Harry served as Stanford's first vice president for the arts and the senior vice provost for education. He was awarded 6 different teaching awards. Harry has also always been a leader on issues of diversity and inclusion. Harry is the author and co-editor of 7 books and dozens of journal articles and book chapters. He was inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, as well as the College of Fellows of the American Theater. In addition to his scholarly work, Harry has directed professionally for more than 25 years. He was awarded the Distinguished Scholar Award from the Association for Theater and Higher Education and the Career Achievement Award from the American Society for Theater Research. Harry, as I mentioned, is also a distinguished graduate of Nobles, winning the award in 1999, which is my year of graduation, so I remember it. On his distinguished graduate plaque, we have written teacher, scholar, author, theater director, actor, advocate, and now we would add university president to that list. Harry, what an honor to be speaking with you tonight.
Thank you, Kate. Thanks for that introduction.
So, shall we take it from here, Kate? Thanks very much, Kate. And thanks for the both introductions. And Harry, it's great to see you. It's so wonderful.
Yeah, virtually.
Yes. Well, and I know some of our classmates are with us, and we'll give them a shout out a little later as we see all of them appear. But it's really wonderful for you to connect with us and with Noble. So, um, so let's start. You've had, as Kate described, you've had a remarkable career. And before we go into higher education, why don't we just spend a few minutes tracing, for the benefit of people, your life from Nobles to the presidency of Occidental College, just to sort of have the big view, and then we can get into some of the specific things you've done.
Sure. So as you know, we both graduated from Nobles in '74. And at that point, I thought my career was going to be like yours. In the sense that I was going to law school and figured that's what I was doing with my life. So I went to Harvard thinking about the idea of that. And the guy who was the proctor in my dorm was a Harvard Law School student and was a major in a thing called social studies, which was a special major, combined major of that included economics, history, and political science, or government, as they called it at Harvard. And since he did that major, I decided I'm doing that major, and that's going to be what I do to get me into Harvard Law School. Well, one, I would say to any student, don't major in college in something for the wrong reasons. Major in it because you care passionately about it, no matter what you want to do afterwards. But I got to senior year, and by that time I had done a lot of plays extracurricularly. And I realized that the only thing that excited me about law school was Perry Mason and the drama of the courtroom. Not a good reason to go to law school. So I went and got a PhD in dramatic arts. You know, it was interesting. I worried that senior year about telling my father what I was going to do. My father was a lawyer and a judge and on the trustee board of Nobles for a little while. And when I told him that I was going to go and get a PhD in dramatic arts, he looked at me and he said, you know, the one thing I would have been if I wasn't a lawyer was an actor. And he told me about a production. He ran for city council, didn't win, back in 1959. And one of the ways that he raised money for his campaign was he put on a play that he wrote and directed and produced. So that was interesting. And I went off to Berkeley with his blessing.
That is fascinating. Now, I just want to go sideways for a second to talk about your dad, because he wasn't just a judge, he was a really distinguished judge. And I also remember during one of the annual meetings of the corporation, all of the former trustees come back, and we had not seen your dad for a few years. And he stood up and he gave a speech about the passion he had for Nobles and how great a place it was. And everyone just stopped and smiled, and just there was a sense of love and respect for him and for what he said. And people talk about it to this day. And so,
Wow.
you know, just real special guy in our community and for Nobles, but I could see he was so effective in communicating as well. So, and you have that same gift.
And like you said, he believed in the power of Nobles, you know, and what made it and what makes it a very, very special place.
Yeah. But so when you just received the Distinguished Graduate Award in 1999 from Nobles, you were described as having a lifelong passion for using theater as a medium for articulating social causes and directing audiences to social action. But at Nobles, I remember you started to emerge, showing some interest in the performing arts. But for the benefit of those who weren't at Nobles at the time, Nobles had no formal theater program. There was no Lawrence Auditorium. There's no art center.
Mm-hmm.
There was one part-time faculty, and the theater was on the stage of what's known as the Richardson Gym. So at Nobles, without any of the accoutrement, any of the fact that how did you find your passion for performing arts at Nobles?
So it's interesting. The only play I did in sort of the conventional ways of Nobles, meaning something that was done as a production by the school, was my first year as a 6E. I did a production of A Raisin in the Sun, and I played little 12-year-old Travis. I've directed the play now twice. I directed it at UC Berkeley, and I also directed it at Stanford now 2 years ago. So that was the only play that I was in or that I did in traditional ways. And the author of that play, Lorraine Hansberry, has become somebody I've studied and written about as a scholar, a theater scholar. So that connection was grew as time went on. But at Nobles, we formed an organization called The Family. And The Family was a Black youth drama organization that was, what we did was we raised scholarship money for both students at Nobles. And since Nobles was all male, as Paul knows, we were the last all male graduating class of Noble and Greenough. And we did plays with Beaver Country Day, the girls' school nearby. And so both of those schools helped form this thing called The Family. And The Family, we put on a variety of plays every year. And it's interesting, I mentioned working later on for Lorraine Hansberry. We did plays that were plays from basically the 60s. And Black by African-American authors, and they reflected the times of the 60s into the 70s, a time around Black power, Black liberation, a time when plays had social messages and concern for impacting the world around through the device of theater. And these were the plays we performed. Later, in graduate school, that would be one of the subjects that I dealt with in my dissertation. That dealt with the question of thinking about why would invariably in times of social need, somebody puts on a play. Why do they do that? Because plays have a way potentially of making people think and even potentially making them act. So that's what I came to write about. But last thing on The Family, my father, one year wanted us to do a production at the Trotter School in Roxbury. And, we were trying to figure out if that's what we wanted to do or else. So he said, look, you do the production there, I will guarantee you a full house. So I said, I had to say okay to an offer like that. And what he did was, remember he was a judge and he was the first Black judge, Chief Justice of the Boston Municipal Court. And he sent summonses to all his friends to come to the production. But, it wasn't a real summons. It was looked like it on paper. So we had a full house thanks to my father.
I love it. Yeah, that's a great story. So we were going to get back to the performing arts and your work with it, but let's go to your time at Stanford and go into the higher education piece. So as Vice Provost of Undergraduate Education at Stanford, as you described it yourself when you introduced yourself to the Occidental community, you oversaw a liberal arts college within the structure of a research university. So over the years you were there, talk about some of the challenges you faced overseeing a liberal arts education at Stanford, and not only how it evolved there, but at other peer institutions.
So one of the major factors looking at any school or college were what I call the changing conditions. And I'm going to give you three of them. The first one over time was the changing students in terms of demographics. Now, a school like Stanford, in terms of the demographics of race, have stayed pretty constant in the fact that there hasn't been a white majority at Stanford in the past 15 years. So that's the largest percentage of minority majority was Asian American, but it came out to each year over 51%. But what changed over that time was social class. So class, Stanford, other schools like it, Princeton, Harvard, were as places where they would have the same number in the top 1% in terms of economic distribution as in at the bottom 50%. So that sense of discrepancy left out the middle class. And the need for, more support for the middle class is something that all schools have faced. But also this growth in terms of students from lower income backgrounds. Now at Stanford, there's a nickname fly student, first gen low income students. And it's become not a stigma or something bad, but it's something you're proud of to be the first in the family to go on to college. But the change in that playing level it created a situation that was somewhat uneven. How do you deal with kids coming from an under-resourced background where somebody, as Nobles or other schools, have taken all sorts of AP exams to get there? So it's a really interesting question of distribution. So that's one of the things to deal with in terms of education. The second thing in terms of students was what we call a move towards the practical. And that is that college has gotten so expensive, as you know, that students are looking not simply at education at college as a means to as an end to itself, but as a means to an end. They're already thinking about graduate school or what they're going to do afterwards. And the idea of tying it to a job. Internships have been so much more important now than they were in our time. The sense of you've got to have things in row, you've got to be thinking about what happens afterwards. So it was particularly acute. I mentioned choosing a major for the wrong reason. Well, at Stanford, the growing major is computer science. And it's grown to such extent that some 40% of Stanford are engineers, and 40% of that 40 are people in computer science. And if you ran into a man on campus, the chances were 1 out of 2 he was an engineer. So that's the changing reality, that people were looking at that discipline, not simply because they loved the idea of computer science, but they saw the sense of lucrative background that it could bring you to. So that's the second thing. The third thing in terms of students was what you called changing social milieu. And that is, we've seen social media, we've seen the power of the internet, we've seen all sorts of other factors affect how students work and study, and how they imagine themselves in the world, and how they come to school, meaning that students have come to school more stressed, more worried, more concerned about their future than ever before. So in a survey at Stanford, 71% of the students on it said they felt overwhelmed in high school. And Nobles was great. I don't think our class would, 71% would say they felt that. So it's a different time and a different space, and that anxiety and the need for mental health and the social environment that students come to is another factor. So those three things have really impacted how we think about and how any school considers the process of undergraduate education.
So what's interesting is I think those are the same issues that Nobles faces at a secondary school level, right? I mean, and it feels like more and more students who are even applying to Nobles feel that they have to have the specialty in the practical. So do they specialize in a sport or a particular instrument or a particular academic field so that they can get in, be attractive to a Stanford or other colleges? So I wonder, is it a chicken and egg, and how much of it is starting at the secondary and even earlier level to compete for Stanford, or how much is it that it's at the higher level and it trickles down? I don't know if you have a thought about that.
I think it's a mixture. I think you're absolutely right that Nobles faces much of the same things. And I mean, there's a pressure to get into Nobles, and how do we, and the question is the same, how do we get people to stop and reflect, the students to think about where they are and to be in the moment, in that moment, be it in high school, be it at prep school, be it on into college. So that was one of the things that we looked to do at Stanford, was try to build into that curriculum somehow space for reflection. Somehow thinking about the purpose of what your education, why are you there in a sense, and something beyond to why are you there at college, and rather than beyond at college just to get into graduate school.
So can you talk about a couple of the specifics, like how you actually did that? I mean, I get the theory, but what did you do? Because the pressure to be practical and to think about converting the education into a tool for the next thing is so intense in all of the lives of students. So how do you go against that? I mean, how do you balance against that, rather?
So it starts with the first year, and students coming in as frosh in that first year, and what you're doing for them. As you know, several schools like Columbia or Chicago have a core that they have students do, which is a different curriculum for the first year. We have a way of thinking about that first year through a couple of courses. One is Thinking Matters, and Thinking Matters tries to look at a question, a problem of great import, past or present, and look at how and why intellectual thinking matters in terms of that problem. And so it tries to inculcate students into the level of college level thinking and problem solving. And so what they take, we have another course called Education is Self-Fashioning. And what that course tries to get you to think is what is important about your education. So it's a course you take your first year, first quarter, and tries to get you away from the idea of thinking beyond that, to thinking about that moment. And then the other side is that, Paul, I think both at Nobles and in higher ed, you got to think about the whole student. By that meaning mind, as we talked a little bit about, body, and finding, as well as intellectual engagement. And to that end, I created a course called Frosh 101. And it's taught in the dorms, and it's taught by peers, and it meets once a week. And it talks about issues of identity, community, and belonging as a way of acclimating and thinking about those concerns and finding a space to talk about how they impact how you are in that moment as you are a first-year student in college. So something has to happen in that first year. And then something has to be sustained. And one of the things we've added, one of the things I love about Occidental is it was already here. Occidental has a program, a capstone program, that every student must fulfill a capstone. It's something we just passed at Stanford as well, to have that final experience where you can look back, synthesize what you've done over the years in college, and hopefully think about and reflect on what it meant to be there for those 4 years or more.
So, and do you have, and then at Occidental in Stanford, were there community service or outreach kind of requirements as well, so that students had to do something off of campus or for the benefit of others on campus?
Great question. Service is one of the pinnacles, or pillars rather, of Occidental. So the service, academic excellence, diversity, and community as the pillars of community and social justice as the pillars of Occidental. So it's not really required, but students come here knowing that that's here. So for example, there's a real commitment at Occidental for student activism. And when I was meeting with there were 2 students, great students, who were on the search team. And one of them at the end of the search, and when I was selected, said, we really like you, but we're going to protest you anyway. So and said it with a smile so I could know what to expect when I got here. So good to know. So the tradition is there. At Stanford, we started something called the Cardinal Service Initiative. And it was to make service an integral part of the Stanford experience. So it's not a requirement, but we tried to make it more attractive through programs in community-based learning. And both places have offices of community-based learning, and not uncommon that that's something. And Paul, you hit on, I think, one of the keys is right now to that idea of speaking to the whole student is experiential learning. Learning that's hands-on, learning that's applicable from the classroom outside in the real world, learning that brings that real world in and really gives you an experience of life in relationship to the classroom. So we're seeing that as more and more important.
And have you seen other colleges and universities following suit, or what have you seen others doing that might be different, or in terms of the industry of higher education itself?
I think you find a variety of things, and you find people doing the same things. So one of them is that putting a lot of emphasis on what we call high impact practices. And those are practices that bring you in close intellectual contact with a professor, and they're found to be effective in teaching students of all kinds and really helping them learn. So a good example is research, and that's happening at schools, both small liberal arts like Occidental, big research universities like Stanford, and research is becoming more of the undergraduate curriculum because of the experiential, because also that it's a high impact practice. So that's one of the things that's being emphasized. Another is the global. thinking of how do we create students as global citizens. So both Stanford and Oxy have overseas programs. Stanford has a rather unique one where they have with 10 campuses over the world. And so students go to the campus and have a Stanford experience there. Oxy, like most schools, has a relationship with other third-party providers in terms of overseas studies. But that sense of going is so important. At Stanford, 92% of the students in this survey said that went abroad said that they were transformed in terms of their experience. So that the global is something that schools I see doing as well. Last thing I'll mention is, go ahead, Paul, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
I was just gonna say introductory seminars so that you bring, in those first 2 years, that first year, as I've said, is critical. That you have a course taught by a professor who's passionate about what they want to teach about, and by students who really want to be in that environment learning about whatever that course may be.
So what's interesting as you're talking, as I'm listening to this, it's so much what Nobles is addressing too in terms of experiential learning. A larger percentage every year of students go off campus for a semester or sometimes a year or other college. And what they bring back, my own daughter did it with the Elam school, for example, is a sense of being and a broader sense of the world than they ever could have, notwithstanding how great a campus and a school Nobles is, or Stanford or Oxy. So I do think that's been valuable for the Nobles education, obviously higher education too.
I didn't know that about Nobles. That's great that happens. So what did your daughter do?
Well, my daughter went to the Island School, and it's sort of a combination. It's actually started in part with the assistance of some Nobles, members of the Nobles community, but it's really a combination of outward bound and a school that talks about sustainability, environmental academics. So it's a terrific program, and you learn so much more just by being there with students and faculty and learning in the environment itself. But there are many programs and that students have done that have been phenomenal. So, so it's interesting that you focus on that in the higher education level too. I think it's important given that we are in a global world, global economy. We go to mental health though, back to mental health. So at Nobles, there's a lot of discussion about the rigor of academics, and now it's evolved appropriately under Kathy Holland to the healthy rigor. So talk about what healthy rigor might mean to you and at Oxy, how you are hoping to address it at Oxy, how you dealt with it, because the pressures of school are in both academic and social are enormous. And I know you mentioned that earlier.
So I like that notion of healthy rigor. And what I would say, it's the difference rather from being challenged, that's healthy, to being overwhelmed. And so that's, and when somebody's overwhelmed and stressed, they can't work at their optimum. And we're seeing this happen to students across the board. We're seeing it more potentially from students I mentioned from under-resourced backgrounds because they feel like they've got to work all the more and harder. And if you're doing that, you're probably working the wrong way. So we've got to set up systems that help get to that sense of challenge and healthy rigor versus the idea of overwhelm, versus the idea of stress in and around it. One of the things MIT and Caltech do, both incredibly hard and rigorous tech schools, they don't have any grades in the first quarter of the year or first semester. So they're shadow grades, they're behind what you get, so you get a sense, but everything's pass fail to try and take some of the pressure off. So that's one of the things that is done. One of the things we've been talking about the relationship of prep school and high school to colleges and universities. And one of the things may be done is the pressure of things like SATs and APs. Some schools are going SAT, ACT less, as a way that potentially may impact the pressure. Or, AP exams, when you've got students feeling that they've got to take 13 of them to get into school-wide, Harvard, whatever, that's a pressure. So it is something that schools can, in colleges and also schools like Nobles work on together. So my daughter went to a prep school called Castellea. It's down the street literally from Stanford. and they changed. They got rid of their APs in terms of upper level science. And it felt that they could teach it with a different sense of rigor and challenge rather than having it be about taking a test. And what they did was interesting. They had me, and also they had the dean of admissions at Stanford come to talk to parents to say, look, you can still get into Stanford and other schools, by this change. And I think that that's a lesson too that has to be given. Sometimes parents are also putting pressure on the kid, that you've got to get into these 4 schools. And there are so many great schools out there. Your life is not going to be determined by that. And so parents, schools working together with college have to do something to get that change that we're talking about, to get to a point of the rigor we want to see in the experience.
It's interesting because I think one thing that Nobles does really well in the college prep process is letting people understand that there is more. There are more than a handful of great colleges and universities. Yeah. In fact, there's an enormous amount. Yeah. And what's important is not the name, but the fit. And I think Nobles does a phenomenal job early on, but as people are starting to think about that, to broaden people's horizons and allow people to see the myriad the multiple possibilities for higher education. So I think that fits well with what you're saying, Harry.
Yeah, thank you. And that fit, I'm hoping to see students from Nobles come to Occidental because it's a good fit. So I look forward to talking to the Nobles students down the line, and someone who wants to come to LA.
So we're getting some questions in the chat room, but before I get to the questions, I want to talk about Oxy. To follow up on what you just said, tell people in the Nobles community about Oxy and why you went there. And some may not understand fully the riches of that college. So let's spend a minute on Oxy, since you are now the president of.
Thank you. It's a small liberal arts college. And what's unique about it, it's a small liberal arts college in a major city. Most liberal arts colleges, Williams, Amherst, et cetera, are out, in the hinterland, really. But the connection to LA is something that we think is really, really important in terms of that extra experience. That's one that allows students to go in to do all sorts of internships, other things to really engage with the city of Los Angeles. In addition to that, as a small liberal arts institution, it's committed to social justice and making positive change in society, global citizenship that we talked about before, community engagement as students come. And it's a place, because of its size, where students can feel really empowered to make a difference, not only in the academic world that they're in for those 4 years, but in the world around them. The most famous graduate, though he transferred after his 2 years, is Barack Obama. So Barack Obama went there, and he felt that's this place that kindled his desire to be, an activist, to be engaged in social justice. And so he attributes that to his time at Occidental. And that's one thing that brought me there, is that sense of one, community and communion, two, the idea that it's a place where students feel that they can be part of making a difference in the world around them.
And how large is the student body?
So just 2,000 students. So that's about 500 each year coming in. And it's a place where everybody knows each other. But, as I said, you can also, it's a place where you can quickly get outside and into the city of LA for a variety of extracurricular activities.
I'm going to go to a couple of questions in the chat room. There are two, one, both from classmates a couple of years ahead of us. And it's about freedom of speech on campus. And if I'll paraphrase the two questions in one, which is, if I'm reading this correctly, almost a sense of concern that of free speech, and is there truly free speech, or only free speech that, only certain speech that is acceptable and some that is not? Curious as to your sense of that at Oxy, at Stanford, and college campuses, because I think you know where that question may be.
Yeah, no, and it's a huge question and a huge matter of concern. And it's one that is kind of flipped since the 1960s, and debates at like Berkeley or other places around free speech Then it was the left pushing for more speech. Now it's the exact opposite. It's the right pushing for more speech. Where I've seen, and both schools slide, is that all speech, I mean, somebody, if a student group and they're legitimate wants to bring a speaker, regardless of that speaker's bias and beliefs, they should be able to bring them. Now, where does it get to be a testy issue? Suppose this person, who they brought to speech is really anti-Muslim, we'll use that one because that's happened at a few places in their speech. But they're allowed by the university, because it's a legitimate group, to bring this speaker. What you also have to do, I think, is look out for these Muslim students who may be a smaller minority, who may feel that all this self more pressurized because of the context that this is happening in. So how do you help that community even as you're allowing free speech? One of the things that Carol Chris said, who's the president or chancellor at UC Berkeley, it says, how do you deal with speech that you don't like, that's potentially anti-Muslim, is by more speech. So there's that bringing a speaker who potentially is on the other side of that spectrum. But I think many schools and colleges have faced that. I'll give one last push with it. And is there a point, even as we allow speech and this person is legitimate, where you don't? Well, that line generally is the legal line of what is constituted as hate speech. That's not going to be allowed at any college, I believe. Now, it's interesting, the former president at Williams, before he stepped down, one of the things he did, they had a speaker coming. He determined that speaker was racist and he wasn't going to bring him. And a private institution can make that choice. That I gave what most private institutions are doing as a choice, but he made that choice. He got people called for him to be, he was a really effective president for the time of his duration. I can't think of his name right now, to be honest. But he got letters asking for him to be resign, and just lambasted from some spectrum for not bringing the speaker. But he stuck by that. So that was his line in the sand. So universities have to look at that in a variety of ways.
It's a very delicate and intense, especially now. I think more than ever, because of what's clearly a polarization in our country politically, regardless of where you are on that spectrum. So
that's why you've got to. I mean, if there's speakers coming, you've got to be proactive work in and around that speaker. Or because all of your students are important. And not just the ones bringing the speaker, the ones who may not be, et cetera. And caring for the whole campus has to be part of the effort at free speech.
Caring for the whole campus, I think, is a really important phrase. So skipping back to theater, we had a question. You mentioned theater indoor service. How do those activities assist in recruitment of a student going from high school to college when compared to athletic recruitment?
Some schools have some interesting ways of adding to the file of what may happen. So at Stanford, you can audition. You can come out in October and do an audition with people from the theater department. And that, it's not going to get you in, but it's going to help. And it becomes a part of your file. Similarly, you can send in a portfolio of your artwork. You can send a tape of you playing music, or also a tape of you dancing. I say a tape. I guess it's a thumb drive now. There's no more videotapes. Anyway, showing my age here. But they can add to the file in that way. So that's one of the ways some schools have it. At a school like Oxy, what you can do, why you can audition in the same way, you can talk about and write about your experience as in terms of the arts and how that is shaped, and that becomes a factor in. So it's somewhat analogous in some ways to recruiting in terms of sports, but not really. It's pretty different often in terms of that. I have a friend, a colleague at Stanford, who feels adamantly it should be the same, that we should pay as much attention to bringing in a new, trumpet player as we should bringing in a new tight end. But most schools are not doing it in the same way.
Yeah. Question from a 2020 grad. In your opinion, what is the main and you've addressed this somewhat, but let's do it more specifically. In your opinion, what is the main purpose of going to college? For all the money that families put together, what do you feel is the biggest takeaway that provides its worth?
Great question, Tony, and it things to think about as you're going on into this. Well, the simple answer is we want you to learn. And we want you to learn about not only, your major, and you ask the people who are around you, your parents who went, if they went to college, others who went to college, what was the thing they remember most about college? It's not going to be what they learned simply in the classroom. It's the lessons learned with people they engaged with, the time they spent, the way they evolved as a person over the 4 years. There's no more formative years than your years that you are in college. About identity questions, how you understand yourself in the world. So that's really, really important. And finding a place where you feel comfortable in terms of that growth, in terms of becoming the kind of person that you will become, that's the place where you want to be. Sure, as we've talked about, higher education is expensive. And making that worthwhile has become more and more seeing the end and thinking about the end. But here I want to say that, yes, internships, ideas, experiences at college that think about the work, what you may do in work is important. Only 27% of students end up doing work that's related to their major. Okay, so that sense of that what you want is a school that's going to prepare you to be a lifelong learner. So you're adaptable to change, because you're also going to probably switch jobs over that time. So you're going to have to be a lifelong learner to be able to, and flexible. So the school that's going to allow you to do that as well. To be sure, you want to think about the other end in terms of a job. But as I said earlier about major, going to a school that's going to allow you to major in something you care about is going to impact you and allow you to find a career in a variety of ways that you may not have been open to someplace else or thought about in ways. So openness to career is something you want, but also you want a school that's going to open you to possibilities.
So what's interesting as I'm listening to you is so much of this is applicable to Nobles because the same questions come up with parents and students and grads. So what's the value of a Nobles education? And I would guess that most people would answer it the same way you just did about a higher education, which is the learning how to learn and learning how to explore and learning how to see the world around you, and then take it from there as opposed to be overly directed. I want to go to COVID-19. So at the end of your tenure at Stanford and now the beginning of your tenure as president of Occidental, COVID-19 has been there. And I think your first major decision related to whether to bring students back on campus. So talk about how COVID-19 is affecting your college and higher education and just some of the implications short and long term.
It's impacted everything. The president of Princeton called it the greatest disruption in higher education that we've ever known. And I don't know if we can make that claim. It's close. The Depression era, I don't know what, really college was like then. So it may have been, but in our lifetime, there's nothing like this that I have seen. And so every school in college is having to plan for it in two ways. One, in terms of testing and battling the virus. Two, in terms of the economic damage that has been done and what do you do about that? So schools like Harvard with over $30 billion are making cuts in endowment, $30 billion endowment. The other schools that have $10 million endowment are feeling it as well. So everybody is feeling the economic consequence. So for me, it was a decision of whether we're going to go remote this fall, starting in a couple of weeks, or do hybrid, as some schools have seen. And ultimately, I decided for a number of reasons, it's going to be a better experience for our students this fall to be remote than it would be. The level of testing that is required, the fact that right now the peak, or we hope that there'd be a peak and that it would be going down from that in terms of where we are in LA County. LA County is one of the worst places in the country in terms of the virus. And so bringing students into that environment was potentially problematic. And as you know, students of that age, 18 to 22, are maybe not as susceptible to the disease as their elders, but they're very effective transmitters of disease. And so we're worried about faculty, we're worried about staff that have to interact with students as well. And so the sense of how we could cover that within the community was really something that kept me up at night trying to think about, what was the right thing to do. What makes it possible too, in terms of the COVID-19 is the preparation now for teaching remotely, that we'll have tutorials, that we'll have other experiences, immersive experience that could only happen on the use of Zoom or other features of technology that enable it to empower. So I think we're going to be able to have really exciting courses. I know we're going to be able to have exciting courses on, but COVID-19 is going to affect us in terms of starting the year in a way we never would have wanted. I mean, I would have wanted to have students and move-in day and all the other things that happened at the beginning of the year. I have no clue as to when I'll be inaugurated as president. And I guess I could do it myself standing out or over Zoom or something, but we'll wait till the virus allows. So it's a very, very different experience of being president at this time.
But just on a personal note too, it's going to be hard for you, Harry, because part of being president of the university is knowing or college is knowing your students and your faculty and your graduates. And that's been largely cut off from you. You can only do so much of that as a new person remotely. So how are you going to do that?
Well, right now it's over Zoom. So I've had a number of people that I meet with all the time that I don't know if they have legs, that the only place I see them is on this screen. And that's the reality. But one of the traditions that I really like at Occidental is this thing called matriculation. And students, all the first year students, all 500 sign this book to say they matriculated. And, the president meets with every single one of them. And I love that idea. And I mean, they've done it in groups in a variety of ways. So I'm going to do that over Zoom. I'm going to do it geographically, and meet with groups of students of 10 or so, maybe up to 15, and have a conversation with them, over Zoom. And doing it geographically, they'll be on the same time zone, but also, they might find new friends, through the process who they didn't have. So we're going to work to impact community, even though we don't have the kind of built-in mechanisms for doing that by having students living in the same room on campus or in a similar dorm. So it's going to be difficult, but it's really, really important. I am on campus currently. That's the campus behind me, though only a backdrop, and trying with distance and with the mask on to meet people as well. It's funny, I mean, people just seeing that part of my face can figure out it's the president. And so people are stopping and saying hello and telling me what they do for the college. And I've been amazed that everybody knows everybody. And that's one of the things that I've been enjoying about
this. Well, no doubt one of the things that attracted you to taking this on from Stanford.
Yeah, that's one of them. I mean, the sense of community, the sense of, as I talked about before, the values of the institution, and the chance to really help them shape and build their future excited me as a possibility right
now. So we only have a few minutes left. So let me ask you just a couple of questions that have come into the chat room about affordability. And actually, I'm going to ask it in this way, that it seems like one of the things that COVID-19 may have done is accelerate, not necessarily change, but accelerate where academics was going, meaning offering some of it remotely and some of it in person. And I'm wondering if that will end up having an impact on stabilizing or diminishing the acceleration of the cost of education, or what other effects COVID-19 might have on the economics of education.
Yeah, no, great question. So higher education is in terms of its service, is driven by things like salaries of professors and that keep growing, or salaries of other people who work there. So there's things that that drive it up in ways that we haven't been able to put a tamper on in the same way over time. So we've seen it just continue up and up and up, and people wondering, when is that pause? You know, at the same time, you've got people in higher education pointing out that everyone's education is subsidized, even people paying full tuition. So the full tuition and full cost of a student being in an institution may be $90,000 and somebody at full price is paying $60,000. So that difference and the way all that's built into the system, it's not you know, your conventional business, and so conventional business models don't work. But you know, what's happening because of the virus? Well, some things are going online, and online potentially may be a way that some things are become less expensive. Also, some schools are partnering with other schools around different things. You know, I mean, you have built-in ones like the schools in Amherst area or the Claremonts in California that work together anyway. But I think we'll see new partnerships, you know, among schools and programs that one has or one doesn't, or ways to share, and that may impact cost as well. A different pedagogy in terms of teaching, and pedagogies in terms of also connections to other institutions. One thing that will also be looked at is the residential, you know, and do you need to be there? We strongly believe you do, that makes a difference. But, you know, if students can learn and be elsewhere to finish their degree, to do some degree, that may impact pricing as well. So those discussions are really going to continue. And as you point out, Paul, they've been accelerated, you know, by the questions that the disease is asking of all schools.
So let me wrap up here with a final question, which is that Oxy's mission is founded, and you've referenced this, on the commitment to excellence and equity and community and service. And that's a lot like the Noble's mission statement that speaks about being dedicated to inspiring leadership for the public good and motivating students to achieve their highest potential and to lead lives characterized by service to others. So it seems to have been a common thread in all you have done in your career. So can you talk about the importance of those principles to you and your life, and also how Noble's impacted you, and how much of that common thread was initially began with Noble's and what we both learned, and all members of our class and others learned at Noble's, in terms of giving back and service?
Yeah, so my Noble's years were just crucial. As I know you feel that, and as fueled your loyalty to the institution for, you know, all these over 40 years that we've been alums. And that sense of shaping me as a person and as a thinker. So even as, you know, the process of the different courses that I took, I may not remember, the engagement with critical thinking, and engagement at the guy at Stanford who in the D school and sort of invented the design thinking, talks about this idea of creative confidence. And I think that's one of the things I got from Noble's. Confidence in myself, confidence to creatively face situations that I was going to face after that in the world. Confident as I went on to college that I was prepared. But it's, I mean, there are still times now, you know, around certain issues that I'll go back to experiences and things that shaped me at Noble's. So that commitment to intellectual, and also the sense of myself as a person in the world, were informed by my time at Noble's, for sure.
So I just want to add my own personal reflection on that, having been involved in Noble's literally from the day I graduated as a class agent, and then many other roles. And what impresses me now that I'm at this point in my life and career is that there are two things that Noble's taught us. And one is space sibi quisque, which is find hope in yourself, or make yourself strong, so that you can go out and make the world better. And that's what the mission statement is now, you know, leading in life characterized by service to others. And I think that what I took from Noble's, and clearly what you took, given the rigor of your own academic career and what you've done, is make yourself the strongest that you can be, so that you can go out and make the world the best it can be. And that's what I think of as Noble's education, holistic education. It feels very much like the same of the career you've had and also what you're doing now at Oxy. I wonder if you see it the same way, Harry.
I love the way you said it. You said it better. What he said.
Whatever he said. And I feel like Nobles has been a gift for both of us. I mean, we met in 8th grade, and we were joking, getting ready for this, about in Nobles they used to have honor days, which is if you got a certain grade or above, you were actually allowed to take a day off from school, which seemed like the ultimate irony in academics. But and I remember having many wonderful experiences as a student with you. But I do think that when we get together as a class in a reunion, that's what people seem to reflect on, is what, not any particular piece of knowledge, but sort of what we learned is how to be as people to go out in the world and make a difference.
Thank you.
By the way, we're going to wrap up, but you've seen in I'm just going to read this. I may not pronounce her name right, but Emma Lieb, class of 74, says, "Hello, Harry. I took one of your drama classes at Stanford and loved it. You were by far one of my favorite professors. I had no idea you were a Nobles grad. I should have known. I'm writing to thank you for being a great part of my Stanford experience. I graduated with a great class of 98. I was lucky to run into you about 6 years ago at a Stanford football game. Occidental is lucky to have you." I would echo that. Occidental is lucky to have you, and Nobles is lucky to have you. And we've been lucky to have you this afternoon. So thanks very much, Harry. And
thanks for doing this with me. This is great, Paul. Thank you.
It's been great. And looking forward to seeing you soon. And to all those who have been able to join us, thank you. Thank you for the questions. Kate, thank you for being amazing at putting this together. And quick shout out to Kevin McCarthy from our class, who was with us, Seth Tower, Peter Martinez, and of course, Kevin McCarthy. So, guys, and thank you all very much. Kate,
Thanks,
back
everybody.
to you.
Bye-bye.